maybe some of you running late because of your work, your day work. But thank you very much for attending, for coming to attend our webinar this afternoon, and maybe it's already evening for you. So before I go to the topic, I would like to mention a couple of housekeeping rules. So I would like you to keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. And if you wish to speak or ask questions, please raise your hand or put your question in the chats. So you will be given the chance during the Q&A session to ask the questions. And also when this webinar will be recorded, I hope you will not reject to it. And a summary of today's discussions will be published after our webinar today and tomorrow. So you are also welcome to tweet during the webinar, and the hashtag is Trust in Media. I will put it on the chat later. So feel more than welcome to tweet about it. So thank you for coming to our webinar on Trust in Media, Telework during and after COVID-19 pandemic. This two-day webinar is part of a project carried out by the European Federation of Journalists and jointly funded by the UNESCO and the European Commission. In the past 18 months, I'm sure all of you have experienced the challenges, but also some advantages of telework because of the pandemic. This is particularly so for journalists who are often working in a 24-hour news cycle. It also brought challenges for journalist unions and associations, whom many of you represent here today. So we knew that this telework will probably not be the end after the pandemic. So with quite a lot of questions in mind and the future, the EFJ Labor Rights Expert Group is leading this work to investigate how the pandemic and telework impact on journalists, as well as journalist union and association, and how they can respond to that to ensure the decent working of journalists. So before I give the floor to our chair, Andrea Hoth, for the EFJ Labor Rights Expert Group, I will give the floor to Adeline Hulin, the project officer at the UNESCO, who has been very supportive and coordinating, representing UNESCO to support the projects for journalists' labor rights and advocates for decent working conditions. So Adeline, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Yuklan. Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and very nice, and thanks, Yuklan, for inviting me to be here this afternoon. I promise I'll be short. Indeed, we've been supporting the EFG for the past years, working on support to journalists' labor rights, and it's been, I hope, and I think very important for, especially for the region in the Western Balkans, in Southeast Europe, because we had really, one of the objectives of our work in the region has been to work on journalist on media professional standards. Well, we've been convinced, and working with the EFG, that the idea, it's necessary as well to work on journalist labor rights to ensure that as well journalists have the right conditions to actually commit to professional standards. And well, I think this discussion on teleworking, I was first a bit surprised, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think it's an exercise that is being done at the moment by many professions. So it's very timely to have this conclusion about the impact of teleworking. What I quickly wanted to say is that what we've seen, apart from the teleworking, is that the impact of the pandemic has made us rethink the way we do our work and the way we have the relationship with our work. And it had a really serious impact on journalism, and you know it better than I do, that journalists have been really in the front line during the pandemic. They've had to go through the pandemic themselves, but also they had to provide journalists with reliable, trusted information on the pandemic, and many of them have put their health and security at risk. And I know that EFG as well has done quite some work in relation to that. They've been as well, I think there was a really good campaign that the European Federation of Journalists has done last year with the hashtag essential workers, because indeed journalists have really been these essential workers and providing this information on the pandemic. But yet also there is one really important element, which is the question of the access to information. And I know it's not really the topic that is being covered today, but indeed the pandemic has seriously altered the way journalists access information because our governance system has been affected by the pandemic. And we know that there's been campaigns, elections that have been delayed, postponed, the parliamentary sessions are now taking place in a reduced number of participants. The press conference are done via teleconference, etc. So by having everything moved online, this has had as well some serious impact on the way journalists work and access information. I think that's really something I wanted to highlight today also, because next week we are celebrating the International Day for Universal Access to Information. And when talking about teleworking, I think this has had a major impact on the way journalists are working. And then one other thing is what you will be discussing today, I believe, is the fact that working from home, journalists don't really get all the support necessarily that they need. And the boundaries between the professional and the personal lives have been quite, are porous. And I'm really looking forward. Unfortunately, I'm not able to stay, but you can, and we will be in touch. And I know you will send me the conclusion and the report of today's discussion and how actually you're planning to deal with this new normal of working from home, which will for sure continue after the pandemic. And last, I just wanted to also highlight the issue of the condition of freelance journalists. We've seen them mushrooming. There are more and more, especially right now in the region that we are working in Southeast Europe. We've seen that media increasingly rely on freelancers. And well, we know as well, unfortunately, that the professional interests of freelancer are not represented by the Journalist Association and Union. And I think this was a discussion that we've had as part of the LARE group in the past. But this means as well that a big portion of journalists that are working with precarious employment contract without benefits and with suboptimal working condition that does not respect the right to disconnect as well. So, and it is true that those freelancers on the other side are not immune from pressures and challenges that are faced by any staff journalist. So I'm really looking forward to today's conclusion and discussion. And yeah, I really hope as well, that this discussion, I don't know, I haven't seen, but you say like more than 50 persons and representatives, and I hope as well like many representatives from the region in Southeast Europe are joining today. So yeah, let me wish you all very good discussion, and over to you, Yuklan.
Thank you, Adeline. And thank you for sharing your understanding of our industry and the challenges that we face. So it has always been a pleasure working with you, because it's rare to have this understanding and working together. So I will give the floor to Andrea Roth, the chair of the Labor Rights Expert Group. And Andrea is also the chair of the European Commission at the German Journalists Federation, DJV. Andrea?
Hey. Thank you, Adeline, for giving us the first insight in the topic. And you said very important words, I think, the new normal. The new normal, we have it since 1.5 years now. And the new normal means, for example, that in Germany, 24% of the journalists work predominantly at home or exclusively at home. So that's quite a lot compared to the counts before, which were around maybe 9 to 10%. So a lot of things changed. And it did not only change in our work, it changed also our lives with good and with problematic outcomes, with changes, which we also be significant for our future of work. And that's why we also do the webinar today, because we know already now that it will change our future of work totally. So we have to be in, I would say, in permanently contact to this, and maybe also to make a kind of series of webinars, maybe for the new future, the near future, which comes now. So many journalists still work mainly in home office, and we call that teleworking too, but sorry, in Germany we say home office to it, so I only mention home office, even if it means also teleworking. But in many countries we have a law which allows home office. That's the state of the art, but not in all countries. And it's mainly dependent on the company agreements in the enterprises, media companies, and the public broadcast stations, and their work councils, of course, to come up with concrete regulations on home office and teleworking, with regulations on upper time limits for working hours, a structure of time recording, substitution rules, and support for work equipment, or financial support for the use of private work equipment, which is also a subject. So, and as well, Adeline, you mentioned it, a right to disconnect, like we have already in France, but not in very many countries. I think it's one of a few countries. So, but it's very, very important for our life in home office. So, I think today we concentrate a little bit not about the private outcomes and life changes. It's a subject for later. But in this round, we asked ourselves what legislation on the national level, which regulations on the media company level, and which support do we journalists need to work in home office? These are all the questions which we try to analyze in our expert group LAREC. And that's why we developed, I think it's 1 year ago, nearly, a questionnaire on home office and telework, which we have sent out to our member countries. We wanted to know what problems journalists face, how their work changed in home office, and if there are also good practices that we could share. The results were integrated in a survey, which we will present now. Mark will present them later. But first, just something practically, I wanted to say, we would discuss now maybe around maximum 30 minutes, and then we will open the discussion with you, but because I think it's very important that we have some input from our member countries and our members, so that means you. So feel free really just to discuss with us. And before, if you have comments or questions, you can already write it in the chat. Yuklan will keep an eye on the chat and summarize, I think, the most important points. And we will have that in the discussion later. So to come to the most important part, I want to introduce my guests now, which is Mark Gruber and Christiana Jankovic. Welcome to our webinar. I don't see them, but I hope you're here, Christiana and Mark. A warm welcome. I'm very happy that you are here. Christiana Jankovic, I know her for some years now. She's a vice chair of the expert group PREG, which means public broadcast, and in the EFG, and she is also the head of the work council in the Austrian public broadcast ORF, our neighbor country. And she is the board member of a union GPA, vice chair of sector ORF. Christiana was and still is negotiating very hardly for regulations on home office and teleworking. And I welcome also Mark Gruber. Mark Gruber is an independent media expert and researcher for various organizations, including the Council of Europe and also for the EFG. So he worked as a Brussels-based secretariat of the international, now I have to read, Mark, sorry. He worked at the Brussels-based secretariat of the International and European Federation of Journalists. And he deals with European media policies in relation with the EU standards, including social dialogue in the audiovisual sector as well as with the Council of Europe and the member unions of the EFG across the continent. And he also worked, like me, as a freelancer journalist in France, so he knows the problems of the basis since 6 years. And I come first to Mark already because you were the one who summarized all these questions, that the questionnaire, who analyzed it, and you had a result on that. And I would like to ask you, what were the main results now of the study, which were the result of our questionnaire?
Okay, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Andrea. Well, I will present a couple of the main results with a couple of slides, but basically, as my working title of the survey will show you, the main result is that the future is definitely hybrid. That's actually the present is already hybrid, but the people want to stay hybrid in the way that most of the journalists do not want to go back full-time to the office, but most of them do not want to stay full-time home either. And I think this is really something that came out of the survey. So I don't know, should I present the main findings now, or did you just exact? Yeah, okay. So I will just show
I think
you
it's a good basis to discuss later on. So
okay.
Free.
So here you go. All right. So basically, just for the background, here are the countries covered by the survey itself. We received 20 replies from 20 countries, and I also had contacts or desk research in more countries. So basically, either red or orange are the countries covered by the survey, as well as individual testimonies. You mentioned it before. People talk alternatively about remote working, about telework, or about home office. So we basically, in this survey, we covered all these concepts, I would say, on the same level, in the way that journalists most of the time are working from home. So it's a home office. The question and the issues, the common challenges for all journalists is whether the telework and home office is compulsory or voluntary. Is it full-time or hybrid? And of course, the consequences in terms of labor rights. And as you mentioned already, the right to disconnect, does it exist or not? Is it regulated or not? And then we have the expectations for the unions that will be covered at the webinar tomorrow, what unions can do and what they expect to do in the future about the situation in hybrid work. So just a little reminder, this was the general situation in the EU 27 last year, not just in journalism, but in all sectors, about either homework or telework. You can see that actually in 2020, a minority of workers in some countries were employed in the employer's premises only, and many of them were either working at home or in other various locations. The specific issues for journalists, as I think Adeline mentioned already, was health and safety, the fact that journalism is a teamwork, and that came up in the replies to the questions, saying that there is a danger to lose the connection with society. Journalism, of course, has to be in connection with society. There are a couple of other professional issues which are not linked to labor rights, but which are important, such as the relation with sources, because obviously journalists have to be able to protect their sources. And again, again and again, the right to disconnect. One journalism from the UK replied to an answer from the NUJ, the Union of Journalists. I feel like I live at work. This is the kind of daily experience of home office. It's more office than home in a way. But it's not like black and white. You also have more. You also have a couple of positive experiences, and from the testimonies we received is that, for example, freelance journalists are more used to telework than staff journalists who have been either forced or asked to work home, and that's an interesting aspect to take into account. And as Juklan said in the introduction, home office is not always negative. I mean, people want sometimes not to go back to the office because you have more time to have a free time because you don't commute, you don't spend hours in transport, you can organize yourself. Freelance journalists, for example, are used working in evenings and not in mornings, and so on and so on. So here the role of the unions and associations is crucial to adapt and get really the feeling of what journalists will expect in the future in this hybrid situation. Now, in terms of protection of workers, there are some general framework at EU level, such as the Working Time Directive, the Work-Life Balance Directive, and the working agreement, the European agreements on telework and digitization. And then obviously member states have also implemented different instruments themselves, either from so-called hard law, so literally a law, a steady relation, to soft law. So sometimes it's simple guidelines, internal guidelines, and in between you have collective agreements, either at sectorial level or sometimes at company level. So just a few examples. This is absolutely not exhaustive, but just a few examples. In Italy, the law of 2007 about teleworking has been adapted last year. In Italy, they call it smart working. I mean, each country has its own denomination. Teleworking is called smart working in Italian, actually. And the right to disconnect has been added, so to say, to this law of 2017. In Romania, the law of 2020, at least officially, allows workers' representatives to have access to the teleworking place to verify the working conditions of the workers. Now, obviously, this is in theory. The role of the unions is to make sure that the practice also exists. In Denmark, all workers are subject to the Danish Working Environment Act, which also applies to teleworkers, for example, on health and safety again. In Germany, the Arbeitsstättenverordnung, that's the workplace ordinance, includes minimum requirements in terms of health and safety as well. But as the unions point out, there is a lack of respect in practice. And just a last example, in Finland, the employers have the duty to take care of health and safety of the employees, including at home. But for example, as the union reported, one large media company wanted to introduce a special clause stating that the employees are responsible for his or her own safety and health when teleworking. So this was contested by the union in court. So you see the situations are very different from country to another. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. So just to go back to the survey itself, here are the answers that we received so far. It's still a work in progress. The right to disconnect exists in less than half of the countries covered by the survey. That means that more than half of the journalists in Europe, so to say, roughly speaking, do not have the right to disconnect. If we focus on two precise national cases, in Ireland, the right to disconnect has been defined in 2021 in a new code of practice, and the right to disconnect is the right to disengage and to refrain from engaging in work-related electronic communication outside of normal working hours. And the interesting thing with this Irish example is that, for example, workers also have the obligation to respect other people's right to disconnect. For example, you're not supposed to routinely, I quote the guideline, routinely email or call people outside normal working hours. So that's quite interesting. And as it was mentioned before already, in France, the labor law 2016 explicitly mentioned the right to disconnect, but didn't define disconnection itself, contrary to the Irish example. So the law obliges companies over 50 employees to engage negotiation with the unions about that, and smaller companies have to implement a non-binding charter about disconnection. So you see, again, you have very different approaches and very different examples of these connections. When we go to voluntary work, you see that in most of the cases of the survey, telework and home office is not voluntary. It has been forced upon workers during the pandemic. State regulations, general state regulations exist in half the countries. And the interesting thing, Andrea, who mentioned that many journalists in Germany worked home. At least in the countries covered by the survey, a majority of journalists are concerned at least part-time by teleworking and home office. Another finding of the survey is that most of the media companies did not have a specific policy on telework and home office. Only 30% of respondents said that most media have such an agreement, and a majority says either no or only few media companies have an agreement. If you look into details, most of the companies who have an agreement are print and public broadcaster, which is not surprising because these are the big, so to say, media companies. So it's easier to reach agreement in big media companies rather than small media companies. Health and safety issues. I know I don't have a lot of time, but just briefly, health and safety issues most of the time cover insurance for homework and a minimum of financial support for equipment. An example, again, if we go to France, is the recent agreement reached in March 2021 at public broadcaster France Télévisions, where all the employees can add a telework addendum to their working contract. So on the voluntary basis, they can agree with the employer to have teleworking. And at the other end, the employer commits not to reduce the working space at the office. That means allowing all the workers to come back to the office if they want. Now, of course, this is in the ideal world. There are a couple of issues that the unions have with the agreement. For example, the financial support is not sufficient. And you have other examples in public broadcasting, for example, in the German WDR, where the unions are negotiating for months, and the management does not want to be as, let's say, generous, so to say, as the French public broadcaster. Just to illustrate this, most of the journalists, at least most of the unions, said that journalists did not have financial support for telework and or home office. And this is what I said in the introduction. The main finding, the striking finding of the answers and the survey is that the future is definitely hybrid, whether you like it or not. Most of the journalists want to continue in a hybrid format. That means they want to keep working at home and at the office. But basically, they want it all, so to say. And I think this is extremely important to keep in mind. And here, that's maybe something to set as a priority for associations and unions, because most of them, when you ask them, do you want to work on that? The majority for the time being still says maybe. And I think this maybe should become more proactive. And just as a conclusion on my side on these preliminary findings of the survey is that telework and home office has to be voluntary, reversible. That it means that you should not decide forever to be at home or at the office. Non-discriminatory between staff journalists, freelance workers, obviously, but also home office and news workers. And that the right to disconnect really should be looked into where it doesn't exist. And this work is still in progress. So if you have comments, and all the people who are listening or watching this webinar, please send more information to my email address that you can see here. So we can either correct if you see that something is not adequate in your situation, or complete. I'm still looking for more information.
Thank you.
That's it on my side.
Not at all, because I wanted just a very short question to you, Mark, and maybe you can write his email address in the chat so that people still have
Yes.
time to write it down. But Mark, just one more question. What were the biggest differences that you found when you read all the answers from the countries, and what were the biggest differences in the field of praxis or regulations which you found?
The big difference, I think that a couple of big differences. You have countries where people are used working at home, and they were forced to do so, but they're covered by general regulations. I think about, for example, Denmark, Finland, the Netherlands, where the unions clearly said, well, we have a general, let's say, umbrella legislation, not just for journalists, for all teleworkers, which guarantees minimum rights, especially in terms of health and safety. Sometimes disconnect, as in France and Ireland. And then you have other situations where the pandemic really squeezed people at home, so to say, and they were totally lost. They were literally lost. And one question, because I didn't have time, one question was asked to the unions: what was the reaction of your members? And some were very basic. For example, do I have an insurance when I work at home? My employer forces me to buy an internet connection. What should I do? These kind of things. So the big difference I can see here is that the brutality in which telework and home office has been implemented in the last year. And maybe that's really a big challenge for the union. The other big difference is that in countries where there was a lot of home office, like Belgium, the union said journalists want to go back to the newsroom. This is what I said. It's a collective profession. People have to be in touch with society, with the sources. At the other side, I mentioned here Kosovo, where the union said, we didn't have home office. We don't have home office. I would love to be home sometimes. So you have this difference. And the main conclusion is everybody wants to be hybrid. Really, this is the finding I saw in the replies.
Thank you very much, Mark. And Christiana, you work as a work council, so I think the problems come up to you because the journalists call you every day and present their problems and their kind of reality of work. And you also organized a survey in the public broadcast ORF about home office. So it's very interesting. What kind of picture of their reality did the employees describe? What are the special challenges for the journalists every day now since home office?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andrea. Yes, we had a survey in the public broadcaster of Austria. We sent out about 4,500 questionnaires, and we had a return of 53%, which is quite a lot because all the persons were moved by this problem of home office. As to figures, they are very similar to what Mark already told us. So 75% of people were working in home office. It was for 82%, it was a good experience, more quiet than an open plan office, no travel time. 65% want to work in home office, but also want to keep a place in the office so that they are not sent back to their home office, but also have a space in the enterprise. They have basic requirements, so they want a provision of equipment from the employer. They want clear rules how to work and how is the workload, a compensation of costs, and they want to work at home only voluntarily. The negative impacts, people told us, were lack of social contact, lack of involvement in decisions. The equipment they have at home does not have the quality of office equipment. They miss communication. There was a shift of workload, so too much work in too little time and workload increasing. And as to journalists, they have some special problems. So they say an investigative journalism hardly is possible possible when you have the home office equipment, if you do only the Zoom interviews, because a lot of stories just come up if you are in the middle of society, talk to the people, and if you don't have this chance only by digital media, there is a real quality gap in investigative journalism. What we also have is during lockdown and reinforced stay in home office, we used a lot of new technology, and new ways of producing were tried out. So methods of editing from distance, Zoom interviews, new editorial systems, where the younger journalists, being more tech savvy, they had less problems. Older journalists just struggled with all these new technologies, and there was only few training offered, but a lot of rollout. So they sent out written instructions and new workflows, and they became a rule without discussion, without developing how we can work with it. And also work description, we would have negotiated on your job, entered in daily routine and setting a lot of colleagues under pressure. So at one side, the technologies made the work easier, but also more extensive and exhausting. And in many cases, they combined the work two employees did before to the duty only one has to fulfill. So we had an editing, we have journalists, we have cutters, and then it's all together placed to one journalist. He is asked to do this work, and it's also more workload. What also was a change was the decision-making in editorial conferences. So on one hand, by Zoom sessions, more colleagues may participate, but on the other hand, discussion process and decision finding is shortened and often simplified. Also, communication, feedback, and exchange about change of structures are impaired. And to enforce the editor statute is more complicated. It's also a problem of work council as well as of unions. People in home office or working in separate teams are harder to reach and to inform about their rights. And business meetings with larger groups were impossible for months. So we had no exchange, and it was very hard to find out where are the problems. So what we are now want to do is to start the process of discussing the distribution of work, the objectives, an achievable time frame to work, and the scope for own decisions. What we also had is psychosocial stress. It's, I think, in nearly all sectors of the pandemic. There is an imbalance between workload and reward, and communication is inadequate to this. Well, that's short, the problems we had to face. And up to now, we have no regulation for home office. We had for people in administration, we had teleworking contracts, but we have only agreements, consensual agreements with journalists about their staying in home office. And as people, as Mark stated before, people want all. So our board says as they want the home office, so we don't have to bargain it. We just do it at our conditions. It's a great problem also for people who have care duties for children or elder persons, especially for women in the sector between 30 and 45. They have a lot of problems for this double bind, caring for children, caring for homeschooling, caring for elder persons. And up to now, there is no respect for these duties. So the aim, a journalist is a person who always can be called and always has to answer its mails or his mails. This opinion is still it didn't change for all the pandemic situation.
Thank you. This is also a subject for later, the work-life balance, but I can only underline that because in Germany we have a study saying that women in home office work all in all with family care and work 1.2 hours more per day since the pandemic and the home office. And men work 0.8 hours a day longer, but for their career in home office. So that makes it already very clear. I would like to ask you, because you are in the company, did the public broadcast offer trainings for people in home office? Because like you said, it's a lot of technical input in the beginning and also later on, because systems are changing, they find another tool and so on. And I think they should be obliged to offer trainings.
Well, they do offer trainings, but only few trainings. And the idea is just a small group of journalists is going to do the training, and then they have a rollout, and one shows to the other, and the other shows to the next. And in this kind of development, you also import mistakes, or you feel insecure because you hadn't enough training, you hadn't enough conversation with a teacher, but only with your colleague who isn't sure if he explains it the right way. And if there is training, people have so much workload that they can't accept the offer. So they have a training course, they have a training offer, and no one is going there because of work. And then they say, oh, it's no need to offer more training lessons because people know all their duties and they know how to face the technology, and they don't offer it anymore. So it's for me, it's a problem. For elder people, it's really a problem. Younger journalists, so up to their 30s, but don't care very much. So they try, they have it in their education at the university, but people beginning from the 40s, they all have problems, and they often ask me, are they allowed to force me to work with this if I'm not skilled with these technologies?
Yeah, I can only. I work also in a public broadcast company, so it's nearly the same. But I think as we all depends on the national regulations, but mainly in the praxis, it depends all on the work councils, on the company regulations. And what would you say as a work council, what could be achieved by a work council in the field of home office and teleworking from your point of view? And what did you achieve maybe also?
What we achieved was what was really hard work, to get all the journalists together, to contact them and to have them in a unique action. That the board can't tell us, oh, all the journalists are content. They like as the work is organized, and you can only find some people talking about it. It's necessary to get them all together and to have a solidarity act. And if you have that, if you have 40 people firming a letter to the board, so there is a change. So if you have them all together, solidarity is old-fashioned, but really the new way to get to results, and to force the people to give the right chances to journalists to come to communicate the problems, find them together and get them together to fight for their rights.
Okay.
And getting them separated is really a danger. Also because people sitting alone at home thinking, I'm the only one who has problems. I'm the only one that can't face the technology. I'm the only one that needs so much time to do my duties. So, and all the others will be better than me. And perhaps they are already in contact with my boss and they have some new rules and they get more money. So they're all sitting at home and thinking bad things, and to get this stress, this psychosocial stress out of them and getting them together and doing some solidarity actions, that really is the aim and is the necessary thing to do.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mark, to come back to the survey, what did you find? Where do the enterprises or the big media companies offer support for the employers regarding training or technical support or whatever, even furniture?
In most of the time, it's I would say in Western Europe, because we are here in a webinar where you have a lot of people from Southeast Europe and Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, definitely companies are sometimes compensating financially the home office workers. I mentioned, for example, this agreement in France. Well, one of the problem of the union was that the compensation was only 250 euros a year, which is, well, it is what it is, but it is at least, so to say, it's cash, right? And there is also the legal responsibility in terms of health and safety and insurance and so on. You mentioned a lot training, just a little parenthesis here. A couple of feedbacks in the survey is that an issue of home office and teleworking is also the issue of the transmission, the professional transmission between senior journalists and junior journalists, which cannot be done anymore if people are just sitting individually I mean, at home or somewhere in a workstation. Yeah. It's difficult for the senior journalist to transmit and train junior journalists. It all becomes much more formal. And maybe that's an issue also to take into account. Otherwise, in terms of support, yes, it's mostly I'll just go back to my details. It's mostly in terms of either financial support, but also sometimes softwares in order to protect, to guarantee data protection. This is something we didn't mention here because it's not totally to do with labor rights, but still, if a journalist has to work at home, he or she should be able also to make sure that the communications and his privacy are guaranteed. And some of the employers are providing softwares, because softwares can be very expensive, as you know. A simple Microsoft license is sometimes several hundred euros. So that's also something which is provided. Unfortunately, a lot of unions just said there is no support. And just to go back to training, it was specifically mentioned in North Macedonia, Serbia, Belgium, Portugal, and Montenegro. And material support is provided in Luxembourg, Malta, Germany, Finland. I'm just saying by some companies. I'm not saying it's a national policy. I'm saying some employers do that. So you do have a tendency that, let's say, in more rich countries, quite logically, the employers provide some financial support, material support, and in the others, it's more in terms of training and insurance. To split it that way.
Thank you very much. This was a very, very good overview over the topic home office. I also noted some things that I didn't know before, the decision finding point or the transmission from senior to junior journalists. So all these points, I think that will also be like points for the future. If we stay partly or mainly in home office, these are topics we have to care for. And I have one last question in mind, but as it is already 5 to 6, I wanted to ask if anybody has questions or comments or wants to tell about the problems or chances in your country. So feel free, feel really free. We are all journalists, so no reason to not talk. It's a webinar, so feel free. We have very, very interesting people here, so you can, if you have a question. Nobody? It's maybe because you're exhausted after home office work the whole day. So if you have no more question, I would ask the two, because Christiana said when we talked before the webinar today, she said, oh, home office is partly not so bad because it offers chances maybe to young journalists. What do you mean with that, Christiana?
They have a more democratic access to journalism, because they don't care, they don't have those old-fashioned structures to get in the conference, in the main meeting. They are by digital means, by digital conferences, they are part of it automatically. You have now a conference. Before were about 20, 25 journalists. Now there are 60, so everyone is allowed to listen it, and all this younger can come into it and say and give their ideas, because it's not that hierarchic structure we had before. So this is a thing I like very much. But on the other hand, as Mark said before, the knowledge transfer, of course, is really is broken. In fact, the people don't come into contact with that. It's a very, very, very hard problem.
Mark, as you also know the journalists, as you worked also as a journalist, what would you say? Would you also prefer a kind of hybrid solution for the future? Where do you see chances and where not?
Well, I would definitely I do prefer a hybrid situation. Well, because even before the pandemic, I was already home working, so to say, and I'm not here to talk about myself, but I mean it's quite important. Obviously, when I used to work as a freelance journalist, we had an editorial meeting on Monday morning, and that was it. See you next Monday. And obviously, I think it is important to have the team spirit, not just in broadcasting, where you have also technical issues, but also online or for the written press. I think the big challenge is also because there is an elephant in the room here. It's the employers. We are among journalists and representative of unions and associations. But one issue is also to see what the employers think about that, because for them, and again, I go back to the French agreement. It's also interesting sometimes to say, oh, well, in this case, we simply reduce the work surface of the newsroom, and you won't have an office anymore. You just might pop in and plug your laptop, but that's not what journalists really want either. And I think the role of the union is to find the balance somewhere between guaranteeing a minimum of health and safety and financial compensation for teleworking, but also to make sure that the newsroom as such still exists physically, and that you can have this commutation between the traditional, I would say, workplace and the home office. And that's really important.
Thank you very much. It's 6 o'clock, and I thank you. For me, it was very informative and very good. I thank you, Mark and Christiana, for joining the session and give us such a good insight. And now I hand over to Juklan and my very dear colleague, Maya, my vice chair, who will lead the next round about work-life balance, which is also very interesting for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just a moment, do I need the light? Okay. Okay, Yuklan.
Yuklan?
Yes, I think you can begin now. I think you can introduce your panel for the work-life balance, and I'm sure one of our colleagues, Rickman, from the European Trade Union Confederation, will answer some of the questions that we pass on to in the next panel. So, Maya.
Yes, it's a really pleasure to see you all. I hope that we will soon see each other at live in Zagreb. Probably hope that most of you will come in Zagreb for 2 weeks or 10 days on annual meeting of our federation. And I'm very glad to say hello on this webinar of our LAREC group, and thanks to Yuklan and Andrea and Christiana, Mark, and other colleagues. In this part of our webinar, we will discuss the questions that arose during COVID-19 crisis, how to achieve work balance, in the new world, telecommunications, home office, or hybrid office. What right do we have in this pandemic? How can we maintain decent working conditions and avoid the burnout? Or it is a new way of workers' exploitation and turning them into free workers. For the first time in the modern history, all three major social institutions, work, school, and the family life, take place in one physical place, in our home or in our room. During COVID-19 pandemic, we switched into full virtual reality, and that created many new challenges working from home, and raised the boundaries between free personal time and time that should be developed to work. As we get connected more and more to technology and social media, it is becoming increasingly difficult to separate work from personal life. Many studies show and surveys show that the pandemic has negatively affected on our lives. And negative impacts on mental and physical condition and work-life balance. So today, now we are going to talk about all these challenges with our guests, whom I will ask to introduce themselves in a few sentences. With us is Orm Midbo, freelance journalist, from Norwegian Journalist Union. Hi, are you here? I can see you. I see that I see that
Hello.
You are with us. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Maybe
Good.
Maybe you can say just a few words about yourself.
Yes, first of all, I would say hello, and this is so typically, I put on my video, and I just see a black screen. So, but I hope you can hear me well. So I can just do like this, okay? Then you can see me behind Stand with Belarus, okay? Thank you for inviting me to this panel. Do you want a short introduction about myself, or should I just keep talking for 5 minutes?
No, maybe just a few words about yourself. Yes. And then, okay.
Good. I have been working as a freelance journalist for over 30 years. So I'm one of the experts on working from home office. I've been doing that for about maybe like 20, 25 years. I have been in the union from the first day I turned into be a journalist, because the union has been very important for me. And I'm sure it has been, how do you say it? If I hadn't been a member of the union, I wouldn't have been working as a freelance journalist now, because it has meant a lot with having almost like a family, people you can share problems with, you know, sitting alone in a home office. I have been leader of the freelancers in Norway, like some years ago. And also I'm the co-chair in the freelance expert group in the European Federation of Journalists.
Thank you very much. Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thomas, you are from a Finnish Journalist Union. Can you also say a few words about yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. So I'm Tuomas and I work as a lawyer in the Union of Journalists in Finland. And so I don't have any journalist background, but my tasks include usually labor disputes, collective bargaining, and pretty much everything related to working life. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Ruari, you are from a European Trade Union Confederation.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, I'm from the European Trade Union Confederation. I'm a policy advisor there, working at a cross-industry level. My work mostly surrounds social dialogue and collective bargaining. And telework is a cross-cutting issue, touching on lots of different aspects of the work and that we do, but it's something also that exists within social dialogue at European level. We have had an agreement a long time ago, and it's we address many different aspects of telework through the social dialogue at the moment.
Okay, let's back to Odin. Now, as Odin said, your floor is 5 minutes yours. But Odin, when we speak before this webinar, and you said to us, "Welcome to my world," because freelancer is a home office all the time. But how did pandemic affect to the position of a freelancer? Is it worse or it's really the same?
You know, I think for many freelance journalists in Norway, most of them are living in cities. And so many of them have, how do you say it, offices together, you know, renting maybe a big room and then they share. And they have this community kind of. But for us living out in the outskirts, I'm living in the western part of Norway, small village. I say, welcome to my world. And also the world came to my office. So to me, I would not say the pandemic is a good thing, but to me, it opened up many new possibilities. I could, you know, sit in Sogndal and attend meetings, not having taking plane and many hours, maybe days traveling to Brussels, you know. I could attend different webinars and also even going to courts. I mean, being a journalist and following some cases that meant I had to travel like 5-6 hours to get to the capital, Oslo, to be inside a courtroom covering a case. I think I was the first journalist that managed to get a link for a courtroom. And to me, it opened up many possibilities, yes. And also when we freelancers listen to our staff colleagues, we think, we will not say they are whining, but because this is so new for them, but it's like, okay, what's new? We know how it is to work from home office. So maybe we should sell some of our experience to the unions.
Yes, maybe you can share with us your experience. Why is your choice to be a freelancer and how to achieve this work balance when you are freelancer and mostly in a home office?
I started working 3 years in local newspapers, and then I knew I wanted to work as a journalist, but I wanted to work with other cases, you know, and also combining having small children some years ago. It makes it, the flexibility was and the freedom, you know. If you don't deliver the goods, you don't get anything paid, you know. So freelancers that keep on being freelancers has to have hard discipline and always deliver into deadlines. But we are also in Norway, I think we are maybe better off than many other freelancers in Europe, but still there is hard time getting paid, and the payment is going down, you know. So the unions still have to struggle and keep fighting for our rights. We did a survey amongst freelancers in Norway just before Corona, and it showed that they were motivated by professional opportunities, freedom, and flexibility. We have low income. It was hard to survive by freelance work alone, and the development of rates had been negative the last years, despite the union presented indicated rates some years ago. Also, it's hard to get paid well. I think that is one of the main things freelancers struggle with. And also, we missed safety net when it comes to pension saving and insurance. And I think the Corona happening now make even many more of us realizing that we have to take care of that too. The union are having many courses trying to professionalize freelancers running their own business. Many webinars. It was before Corona and also after. Did you get the answers?
Yeah. Okay. And yes. Claudia is here with us. Hello, Claudia. Welcome. We started without you, and it's nice
Hello.
to see you here. Hi.
I'm sorry, it was a technical problem.
No, okay. Claudia is from Portuguese Journalists Union, and maybe can you just say a few words about yourself?
Well, I'm a radio reporter. I'm a member of the board in the Portuguese Union. I'm in the second term, so it's been 4 years since I'm a member of the board at the Portuguese Journalists Union. This last 2 years, 1 year and a half, it's been quite an experience, especially because of this virus and all the challenges that we are facing as journalists, but also as a member of the board, with new problems for journalists in Portugal, around the world actually. I work in radio. I do sports, especially in the national radio in Portugal, and I'm 37.
Okay. Well, maybe now I can ask you right now. As you said, since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we all had to adapt and change our usual way of life. However, women were affected on several levels because they face huge challenges. Very often they have to take over additional responsibility at home, and they continue to juggle in the field of careers. Are women additionally bounded by change because of COVID? Is it harder for us, Claudia? Sorry.
I think it's always harder for us. Not only during COVID times. And I work in sports, so it's especially harder for women in this specific area. But maintaining the focus here in COVID, I think it's harder because the domestic challenges, the maternity challenges, and despite we are in 2021, and despite all the politics promoting equality, socially, it is still different. I'm sorry if my English is not perfect. What I'm trying to say is that for governments And for in Europe, in a general way, we are all equal to the law and to the constitution of our countries. But if we see the question in a social view, we know that it's different. The society puts much more pressure on women regarding children, regarding domestic life. So with COVID, it's been harder for women because the balance is even harder to achieve. If you work at home, your children aren't at school, you have to maintain the order at your house, and everything is on women's back. Of course, it's not 100% like this, but in a general point of view, women have harder times with COVID, more challenges in this balance. And I think emotionally, psychologically, and of course, physically, it's very tiring for us.
Yeah. Okay, Thomas, in Finland, you also did some research on teleworking. You told me, so maybe you can share the main point of this research results. And how did your union cope with the challenges in this crisis? And how did you help your members to achieve those balance of working and personal life?
Yes, of course. The results we have, they are very much same as Mark has just said. But about our survey, yes, last winter we did a member survey about teleworking to examine how Finnish journalists have experienced the shift from office to home. And before the pandemic, only a small minority of journalists were teleworking regularly, but after the pandemic, a majority were teleworking full-time or regularly. And to summarize our results, teleworking was largely supported by our members, but it's notable that only about 5% did support teleworking full-time. The majority, over 80%, did support hybrid working, which means working from home 1, 2, 3, or 4 days a week. And I guess that the perception is that it brings benefits and declines risks of teleworking. And about the benefits, what Finnish journalists had experienced, well, telework seems to generate well-being and quality of life in overall, because people have more free time, flexibility at work, and maybe better focus on work. But telework seems, according to our survey, telework is not a salvation, as there was a lot of experienced risks regarding well-being, and the biggest risk was lack of social contacts to other colleagues, and other but much smaller problems were insufficient work equipment and poor ergonomics and static work days. It's also notable that journalists also had done much more recorded and unrecorded overtime work when teleworking. And shall I tell about our instructions we did to our stewards?
Yes, maybe you can.
And members, what you should remember if you are teleworking. And this is, of course, in context of Finland and Finnish legislation, but I think it's almost everywhere that teleworking always a matter of agreeing. So worker cannot be forced to telework. And of course, this means that the worker doesn't have a subjective right to telework. And our union thinks that the best alternative is to draw a written agreement, but it's also possible to telework without actual agreement under employer's direction, but with acceptance of worker. And when agreeing about teleworking, or when you're teleworking, occupational health and safety is I guess it's the most important thing, especially ergonomics and mental health. But it should be remembered that health and safety can't be a matter of agreeing. And this is because employers' general duty is to take care of the safety and health of their workers. And at least in Finland, teleworking says nothing, as Occupational Safety and Health Act also applies to teleworking, and any agreement reducing the rights of or benefits are under the act are null and void. So there shouldn't be agreeing on work safety and health at all, because it's a matter of law. When talking about safety at work, it's also good to remember how occupational accidents are regulated when teleworking. And in Finland, Workers' Compensation Act isn't really applied to occupational accidents when teleworking, but for employer, it's possible to take extend insurance for occupational accident and then occupational accidents when teleworking. So when you're teleworking, it should be figured out if there's need for extend insurance. And one important thing is just the termination of telework agreement. And usually employers usually want to have the right to terminate the telework agreement, but it's also important that worker can also terminate the agreement if the costs set for the telework are not met in the future. So that was about our instructions.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Rory, can you tell us, please, what is European perspective of the problem we're talking about? How to achieve this work-life balance in the new world of teleworking, and what is your experience? How is it in some other industry, and let's say on this European level?
Sure, thank you very much. Indeed, and I think a lot of colleagues have covered some in-depth points already. I thought maybe it might be useful to just maybe outline what already exists at the European level, because we do have an agreement from 2002 with the employers at European level. And now I know what you're all thinking, 2002 is like a lifetime ago, especially in terms of telework and digital tools. But this was our first agreement with the employers at European level that was an autonomous framework agreement, which means that it was implemented at national level rather than through directive at European level. So the idea of this agreement was to get activity at national level, and by and large it was quite successful at doing that. And in general, it was implemented through collective agreements. Often it informed the law that was developed at national level, but also through guidelines. You know, especially in Nordic companies, there was telework elements in different agreements. So this European level agreement worked to be able to update those different elements through different guidelines and updating the different collective agreements. But to quickly run down what was in, or what still is in this agreement, because of course it still applies to this day. I mean, first of all, we looked at the voluntary character and nature of telework. Thomas also linked into that it should be voluntary, it shouldn't be obligatory. We looked at employment conditions, in particular that teleworkers and those who work in premises should be treated equally, and they should have the same rights and the same opportunities. We looked at data protection. This is more related to the data protection of the work and the work content. Privacy, which of course is a big issue now, which has exploded even further now that so many of us are working from our kitchens and our bedrooms and have this always on nature to work. We looked at also equipment, how the employer's obligations to provide and maintain equipment, health and safety, also mentioned quite in detail by previous speakers. Work or organization, which was a big aspect in relation to the autonomy of work, because this is one of the big benefits that we're all talking about in relation to telework, that teleworkers generally have more autonomy in how they do their work. We discussed training. There's 3 elements to that, which I caught the tail end of the last session as well, which I think touched upon this too, in relation to the training of the teleworkers themselves to use the different software and hardware, the training of the management on how to deal with telework and how to properly manage telework, but also in relation to access to training, and that is also linked to the equal treatment. And very importantly, we also discussed collective rights, which is a big topic, especially in how we can enforce proper and fair rules around telework, how the role of trade unions and workers' reps should be respected. So that was the 2002 agreement. These were the general issues covered, and I think you can see it was actually reasonably comprehensive in how it dealt with all these different aspects. Now, of course, we live in a slightly different context now. We've gone through a period of obligatory telework because of the pandemic. This really kind of changed the nature of how we discuss it, because we're moving out of that now and we're negotiating from a very different position. Both as workers, we've had huge experience on the good and bad parts of telework, but also from the perspective of employers who have in many cases seem to really embrace telework to a degree which wasn't there before. Another aspect which I just wanted to highlight in relation to the European context and what's been done at European level is our agreement from last year on digitalization. Now, we agreed to discuss this. This was negotiated and concluded just at the start of the pandemic, so it wasn't really negotiated in the shadow of the pandemic, but it addressed many aspects of work which have been affected by how we've had to adapt to the new working reality. Some of the important points that we managed to include in that agreement, which once again should be implemented over the next 3 years by national social partners. Some of the important aspects is a joint partnership approach to the introduction of digital technology in the workplace. So it should be done jointly with management and with workers' representatives. Then the areas we touched upon are skills and job security. We also have an important chapter on which is called the modalities of connecting and disconnecting, which in other speak we could refer to as the right to disconnect, and how we can try to enforce that. We speak about AI and the human in control principle, which also has massive repercussions for surveillance and privacy, but also how we now interact and how management interacts with us. Many HR decisions are taken along those lines, and as we telework, as we work more digitally, there's lots of things that can be measured in a different way and reviewed and can feed into performance reviews, promotions, etc. And lastly, we looked at privacy and surveillance, and an interesting aspect to that part of the agreements, we make reference to the need for workers' representatives to have access to the workforce, and we mention digital notice boards. One last important aspect of this as well, I think, is that we managed to get a reference to the platform economy and platform workers as well, which I think was really very important, because this is where a lot of this is happening. It's where a lot of the controls are. So in order to have these workers also covered by this agreement, but also the collective agreements and the legislation, etc., which can happen as a result of this, is very, very important.
You are muted, Maya.
Yes, and I can find microphone. Sorry, I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry, really. You mentioned the right to disconnect, and I think that it's very interesting for a lot of us, because we know that in France, I don't know if Pablo is here, there is in the process or already
It's a law.
It's a law, yeah, it's a law, right, for right to disconnect. What do you think about idea, or what do you think maybe should all countries apply this law for right to disconnect? Because one of the biggest problems with health is that we really, since this outbreak and this COVID crisis, with this old technology, workers have to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have this smartphones, information technology means that people find it difficulty to switch off, to disconnect, and even on holidays. So what do you think? Is there any chance from European level to push national countries to debate about this law, debate about rights to disconnect? Because I think that we are all unionists here, and I think that it's really a good way.
Yes, in a short answer, if there's a chance at European level, it's certainly what we're pushing for is European legislation on how to enforce the right to disconnect, because this is something that came up a lot during our digitalization negotiations, is what about this right to disconnect? Because, you know, in a technical sense, it exists. You know, there is a working time directive. There are usually working hours that, you know, so we have that, but in reality, how do we enforce it? And that's the problem. There's the people work in such an individualized and specific way now, that to be able to enforce this right to disconnect, which already exists, is very much needed, but at that European level, at that collective level, so that it's done in a clear and transparent way. It's something that we're certainly pushing for at the European level. It's something that the European lawmakers have been speaking about. Our digitalization agreement addresses it in some form. It gives some guidance, but I think a lot more is needed to really put it, you know, clearly on the agenda, and to make sure that it happens in every workplace, because that's one of the things, you know, is that jobs are very different and job requirements are very different. But just because things are developing in an on-call way, you know, it's very oppressive for many workers when there's no guidance, when there's no way to do that. I mean, one of the aspects is, of course, even if there's a clear right to disconnect, if you choose to disconnect, do you then lose out as a worker, you know, compared to other workers who remain available? And how do you legislate for that? How do you make a proper collective agreement or law or policy which can ensure that people don't lose out if they actually do use their right right to disconnect? So that's something that has to be really, really clearly looked at, and it's a culture change, of course, but you know, it needs to come in a clear message. And what we're calling for is a legislative initiative to make it clear for everyone that a lot more is needed, so that people can really enjoy their right to disconnect.
Mm-hmm. Audrey, what do you think about law about rights to disconnect? How do you disconnect from the work? And do you think that that's a problem we have to solve with some law, with law?
Yes, I think the union has, how do you say, important work to do there. I don't know how it is in different media organizations now, but I kind of think that how do you say, the clubs in the different working places are strong and they know the workers' rights. When it comes to freelancers, you just have to cope with it alone. I know for sure. I don't know if I should answer for freelancers or the staff members, but I see the Norwegian Union of Journalists did a survey last summer, and I think they got like 2,600 answers. That would be about 44% of the members, and or the one that got the survey form, and just the first hour they got 400 answers in. So it was about the situation on Corona, and it was both for members and all members, but also staff and freelancers. So on a way that indicate that journalists want to share their experiences and also learn from it. They've also just done a new survey, so I think it would be okay to compare the two. And I also think most countries have done surveys. I don't know, Mark, you said something about that. I saw Norway was gray in your map, so maybe if you are interested, I could send the results over. But at least I see like 1/5 have worked fewer hours than usual, while 45% have worked more. I think that is quite common. And also like 42% think it will be more difficult to do a good job without face-to-face contact. And when it comes to physical health, it said the lack of colleagues and the collaboration in the newsrooms proves to be more important for journalist health than the risk of becoming infected and the fear of becoming seriously ill from Corona. Hybrid. I think journalists are how to say it, dependent on working with humans and seeing each other, and also particularly photojournalists are at the biggest risk. I think the results show that photojournalists were to get infection. They are the member group that had been quarantined, also quarantine, quarantined at the greatest extent after being exposed to infection, 23%, or being kept in isolation because there was a risk that they were ill. So, I mean, some of the journalists need to get out to do their work, and then I was thinking, so what was your question, Maya? But I think
my question was, what do you think about law?
Yes.
About right to disconnect, but now you open some other problem. And for example, in Croatia, we followed the problem in some media houses. They decided to cancel the lease of a part of the editorial office, newsrooms, which actually takes away space for journalists. Colleagues fear that the employer intends to leave them at home for a long time, and they don't want to be at home for a long time, and actually change their status. What do you think about this problem? And after you, Roger, maybe Thomas, you can answer. Is there similar trends in Finland?
Yes, Thomas, you can take the word.
Okay.
Yes.
I can unmute you. Maybe you can. No. Okay.
Sorry, do you hear me?
Now we can hear
Yeah.
you.
Yes,
Yeah.
there are similar problems as this is related to this hybrid working. In Finland, almost everyone thinks that hybrid working is a new principal way of working for long term. And because of this, many companies think that they can cut down their business enterprises for cost reduction. And well, I think time will tell if this is a problem, because you can predict the future. It's possible that after 2 years, teleworking isn't not so popular and people want to get back to office. And I guess the unwanted outcome is that there isn't enough room in the office, and worker have to telework unwillingly. This can be a problem, but as I said, time will tell.
Okay. Claudia, another problem became a really big problem in pandemic. It's a problem in our journalist life, but I think that much more our colleagues have those some kind of burnout because of a lot of problems in the work, because of our journalist style of work, and because of pandemic. How to avoid burnouts in yes, I know you don't have answer, but you know what I'm talking about.
I understand what you are saying. I just wanted to add more problems to those who which have been already identified by all the members in this reunion. Here in Portugal, we had a lot of problems with pandemic in access to sources. COVID turned to be an excuse to, in some particular events, political events or social events, to reduce number of journalists presence, or to reduce the access, the time you can access, or the questions you make. Well, it turned out to be an excuse for everything, but everything bad to our work as a journalist. So a lot of restrictions to press freedom we have been identifying. Access to sources, especially institutional sources, press conferences without questions or without the presence of journalists. And this is a very big problem in Portugal, because we are identifying that our profession used to be more socially recognized than it is right now. I think it happens in a lot of different countries. The increasing importance of social media and other ways of communication are decreasing the importance society gives to journalists, to free and democratic journalists. So with COVID, this environment we are working in Portugal turned to be harder. The respect to our work and to our profession has decreased, and we are facing a lot of problems in that area with press freedom restrictions and access to sources. And I wanted to add this problem to the list that you have already been talking about. Well, about burnout, I don't know how to balance.
Maybe I just
okay.
Just a short question about. I think that we share in probably all European countries those problems. We do
yes,
our rights, journalists' rights, because of pandemic, and I think that my government and maybe your, as I heard, your government and maybe in some other countries use this situation. But what we as a unions, or what did we do to help in this situation?
Well, in Portugal specifically, it's not a governmental problem. It happens in different institutions, in political parties. We have regional elections next Sunday, and it's regular. We have complaints about difficult access to events, sources. So it's not only in a governmental level, it's more general. And it's very worrying for us, obviously. What do we do as a union? Well, we always protest. We always make some, how do we say, an official document we send to the different institutions that can defend press freedom, access to sources, and this democratic way of being a journalist in a democratic country. We always do that. We try on the same level to I don't know, raise awareness about this in a social level, more trying to involve more the society, so that the society can understand the role we play and the importance of the role we play. So we try to raise awareness in the society to help. I don't know how to facilitate this way of working. We don't have another way of working. We have to be present. We have to make questions, and of course we need to have some answers. But to have the answers, it's not our responsibility. The responsibility is to be able to make questions, and sometimes we have that difficult as well. We also started to promote a survey in our associates to understand what we are doing what we are doing now. What Portuguese journalists, in what point Portuguese journalists are in telework, because each member of the board knows a case. For instance, in the National News Agency, most people were working at home during the pandemic, so they are in telework. In the national TV, we know some cases. In some newspapers, we know as well. But we decided to promote a survey so that we can understand the full environment and have more global answers. The survey will finish in the end of September, so we hope during October to have some results, and we can probably identify more problems and adequate some measures to help our associates. That's a way of facing some problems. Also, we have made a document, like frequently asked questions. We have made that document with our lawyers. We have this lawyers support to our associates, and we did that guideline with question and answers about telework, so that we can help our associates, because each company, each media company does it differently. people have a new agreement, or people just have a verbal agreement and go home to work. We don't know how the working conditions are. So we did that guideline with frequently asked questions so that we can help the associates to defend themselves and their rights. And I'm sorry if I'm not answering specifically to your question.
Okay, no, it was really interesting to hear what are you doing in Portugal, and it's very interesting how I get in the 3 steps from work balance to protest against pressuring journalists. But let's go back on our main subject. It's work balance, but I see that Renat has some questions, and Renate after Renat. Please, Renate, wait, and floor is yours, Renate. Sigurno.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice to see and hear these kind of conversations. It was really interesting. So yeah, I'm not going to. I'm trying to follow this topic, the work imbalance, but I will try to say that you are. Nothing complain about European Union journalists, because in Russia, I think the previous 2 years was the most hardest for these kind of workers, especially on the eve on the elections that was placed in Russia 2 days ago. I think in the parliament, it was the parliament elections. I think that the most like free, like liberal mass media during this summer has received the status of foreign agencies. It implies that these kind of media have the international influence, and that's why they have lost. Excuse me, it's like playing. Sorry. They have lost the sources of budget, the financing. That's why it's really, of course, it's awful, terrific situation, but it's interesting to observe how they cope with this. They have already, I think, managed with this problem, because they started the campaigns of fundraising, that private subscriptions, popularization of their ideas. That's why also during the COVID period, the access, of course, some of the colleagues says about the access to information has already not prohibited, but it was hard to find the information because most of the meetings and of course events was online. Yeah, that's why 2 main reasons got together, and now we have like situation like this. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Renate. I'm sure that you have something very important about our subject today, and it's a balance between private and professional life.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry that I'm a little bit late because I had a date at the doctor. It was not planned. So sorry. Yes, in Germany, in our Union Verdi, we had a great discussion, especially with our women group, that they want a law for, in German, it's called a home office, because then you work at home 100%. Yeah. And we discussed it, what you all said, the most of the pressure is to the women, yeah, with children, with making the job and doing everything at home, and not every time have help from from their husbands or partners. So we haven't any law in Germany because our government said there's no between the two parties there's a great difference because Christian Democrats don't want this law, and the Social Democratic colleagues, they want this law. I know it from IT sector. A lot of people are having teleworking and have agreements in the company, for 1 or 2 days making teleworking from home, but not want to make telework every 100%. And so we are not very amused about this thinking.
I'm sorry. I have to say that we have only few minutes. It is really interesting, but you know, we have to finish until 7 o'clock, and I really would like to give just few words for our Andrea, president of our LARIC group, on the end of this session. I have to say it was really interesting to hear this or personal examples from your countries, and of course from your European level. I think that we can agree that we share the problems. We don't have answers, but we will try to find answers and build something together to protect our members, to protect journalists, and to support journalism. And of course, workers in the media in these very awful times, and in these pandemic times. Andrea, please, can you just on the end of this first day of our seminar, I'm very proud because we managed that. Please tell us and our guests a few words.
That's very spontaneous. I wasn't prepared because I think Juklan will close the session, but it's no problem. But I can also already tell you that we would be very pleased if you join us tomorrow at 12 a.m. because this is the how do we call it in Germany, and a Mittags webinar. So we also continue with home office tomorrow, and that's the next part, the most important part maybe, about the future in home office. And we had so many points today already relating to that, and it would be really great if we would come together. But if we would find good points for home office in the future, and maybe this would be also good for Mark to collect it in the survey. So I thank you also very much. Like Maya, we work very hard in LARIC to make webinars like this and to care for topics like this, and I hope we can continue like that. And thank you. And now I give the last words to Juklan, of course, who was supporting and organizing all this webinar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you.
Yeah.
I would just say thank you because I can see your face is getting dark because it's getting late. So I thank you, and I hope to see you tomorrow. And if you have not registered yet for tomorrow's sections, we will see each other tomorrow during the day, during around lunch hour. And tomorrow, as Andrea said, hopefully we can find some more concrete good practices and ideas. And I hope you all a good evening and enjoyed your dinner. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
See you
you
tomorrow.
tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Maya. Bye.
Bye-bye.